We are honored, as always, to partner with the Cleveland International Film Festival to share in this and many other films that are taking place. And you will hear it a couple times from us today. But if you have not had the chance yet, go out, get tickets, watch the film festival. It is virtual this year, and Patrick's going to tell us more about it. But it's a huge list of films that you will be blown away by. So please do make sure you get out and see those films. But for today, we're going to talk a little bit about the film Not Going Quietly. And we're really excited to welcome in some of the folks who were responsible for making that film possible. So first, we have Nicholas Bruckman, who is the director of that film. Nicholas produced the feature film Valley of Saints, which won the Audience Award at the Sundance Film Festival and was nominated for an Independent Spirit Award. That film was released on Netflix and was a New York Times Critics' Pick. He previously directed the feature documentary La Americana, which won the Best Documentary Prize at the New York and LA Latino Film Festivals. That film was also broadcast worldwide on networks including PBS, National Geographic, and Al Jazeera. Nicholas's work has received support from foundations, including the Fledgling Fund, CineReach, the NYSCA, the NYFA, and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. He's the founder of People's Television, a New York and DC-based branded and original content company. We're also excited to welcome in Amanda Roddy, who is the producer on this film. Amanda is an award-winning documentary filmmaker with People's Television. She has led projects as a director, producer, and writer for clients such as the Democratic National Convention, CoverGirl, Elizabeth Warren's presidential campaign, Equal Justice Works, the Nature Conservancy, and the Equity Fund. Recently, she directed and produced a 2-minute primetime television spot that appeared on NBC during the 2020 Democratic National Convention. Her work has been supported by the International Documentary Association, Rooftop Films, Film Independent, IFP, and HBO. And we're thrilled to welcome in Patrick Shepard as our moderator today. Patrick is the Associate Director of the Cleveland International Film Festival. And in his time there, he has managed the fundraising and community engagement efforts for the festival, as attendance has more than tripled in that time, and their budget has quadrupled over that time as well. Before coming to the film festival, Patrick worked at the American Red Cross, where he won the American Red Cross Tiffany Award for Employee Excellence and the American Red Cross CEO Spirit of Excellence Award. A lifelong Ohio resident, as well as a graduate of Leadership Cleveland 2020, best class ever, and 2003 Cleveland Bridge Builders. Patrick has served as a board of directors member for nonprofits such as the Film Festival Alliance and the LGBT Community Center of Greater Cleveland. And to those in the know, he's an avid traveler, especially around the state of Ohio, visiting and documenting all 88 county seats in our state, and is one of the premier social media follows in all of Cleveland. So welcome, Patrick. Thanks for moderating today. I also want to acknowledge that we have, that the film today talks about ALS. And on the call, we also have Mary Wilson Wheelock, who's the Executive Director of the ALS Association Northern Ohio chapter. So as we get into conversations, Mary is also a resource for us today. So as we begin, before we get into the conversation, we'd like to show a short clip of the film. So we're going to do that, and then we'll be able to jump in and have the conversation.
Blow as hard as you can. Blow, 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 blow. Keep going. Go, 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 go. It was 44%.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a huge decline.
Is it?
Yeah, I was at 70. My whole body is going paralyzed, but losing my voice is far more consequential for me than losing my ability to walk. I've got a lot to say and not a lot of time left to say it in.
Abba doing?
What is Abba doing?
Medicine.
Carl,
Medicine.
yeah, medicine.
No.
Whoa.
I'm not sure how many more months I have where I can speak well enough that I can be understood, but I plan to spend every one of those months doing everything I can. As my life is coming to the end, I want to make my son proud. Rachel knows that this may be one of the last times I can bird dog a senator or speak at a rally. She's sacrificing so that we can do this. I admire her and appreciate her so much.
Well, that is a segment from what is a very powerful and impactful documentary. And I do want to thank the director of Not Going Quietly, Nicholas Bruckman, and the producer, Amanda Roddy, for joining us. And let's get right into the questions. Nicholas, can you tell us about the origin story for this film?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Nick and Patrick and everybody here for joining today. We're really excited to share the film with you and to be part of the Cleveland Film Festival. And, you know, just to begin, I think we really made the film to make an impact and raise awareness about healthcare and about ALS and about activism, which is what Audi champions. And we began the project when Liz Jaff, who is Adi's partner at the Be a Hero campaign, met Adi on an airplane. And of all things, for those who haven't seen the film, Adi, who had recently been diagnosed with ALS, met Liz totally by coincidence. They didn't know each other at all, as Adi was protesting the tax bill in DC, which was going to cut into healthcare for people like Adi. And he had gone to DC to try to make a statement and try to reach Senator Jeff Flake and the other Republican senators who were going to vote for or against this tax bill, which threatened people like him and other families who have, healthcare needs. And completely coincidentally, Liz and Adi got to talking, and she said, "Did you know Senator Jeff Flake is on this plane sitting up front? And why don't we go talk to him right now? And why don't we film it?" That interaction went viral on the internet because Adi asked Senator Flake, "Tell me or tell my son why you're going to vote for this bill if it's going to prevent me from getting the healthcare that I need." And it was such a powerful, emotive interaction that Adi propelled nationally from being a sort of unknown activist to being the face of this struggle for healthcare in the US. And Adi and Liz decided to launch this as a formal campaign together. And Amanda and I work at a film production company where we tell stories, not just independent films like Not Going Quietly, but short political films for social causes. But we work for candidates, we work for organizations like Greenpeace, really trying to bring filmmaking skills to campaigns, working on causes we care about, not just healthcare, but environmental issues, racial justice issues. We work with Black Lives Matter and other organizations to tell these kinds of stories. And that was the capacity which Liz reached out to me through a mutual friend to say, "Hey, we want to make a short film to launch this campaign." We went out to meet Adi. We did this interview for what we thought would be a short film, but immediately after meeting him, we became immediately kind of fell in love with him and realized that not only was this story much larger than just this 2-minute video to launch this guy's campaign, but actually the nuances and the emotion and the heart and the humor with which Adi looked at his own life. You don't get to see as much of the humor in that clip. That's kind of a downer scene, but the movie is very funny, I hope. And Adi's really funny. And his resilience and his ability to transform this tragic thing that was happening to him into a tool for social change was incredibly appealing. And so we asked him basically the same day, after we make this short film, can we follow your life for as many years as it takes to see where this journey unfolds? And that's really just the beginning. So yeah, I'll pause there, and that's how the genesis of the project came to be.
And it's quite a journey, and we will dig into that. Amanda, can you talk with us about what drew you to this project and why it was so compelling?
Yeah, definitely. I think for very similar reasons to that Nick outlined. I think when the first time I heard Audie speak, I actually had heard him on Pod Save America, so was somewhat aware of him before we even started working with him. And the way that he speaks about issues from a place of compassion and empathy for the people who are going through those struggles, and he's able to communicate them in a way I think that really resonates with people's hearts and minds. That was something that I thought was very unique about him as an activist and an organizer. And just as a human being, he's actually a very talented orator, and he moves people in a way that is really, really unique, and he really genuinely cares about other people. And I think just seeing that and being around that was very infectious and made me want to dedicate a lot of my time to helping to tell his story. He just is he's a really good human being, and he's able to affect change. And I knew that not only was it a story worth telling, it was also a story that I could learn from and grow from. And I felt like if I felt that way, a lot of other people would as well. And so it just made it very clear that, you know, this was a story worth bringing to larger audiences.
That's great. Well, for those of us who are unaware, Adi Barkan was named by Time Magazine as one of the most influential people in 2020. He held the national and international stage at the Democratic National Convention on a speech. And Nick, your team captured the moment when he said something really profound. He said, "The paradox of my situation is that I get, the weaker I get, the louder I become." And as you've already talked about the origin story, you were following this story long before he was interviewing presidential candidates last year. So can you talk about how your journey progressed?
Yeah, absolutely. We certainly never could have imagined where the story would go. Adi had, as I mentioned, just mentioned Liz, and was really an unknown father, an unknown activist. And when I say unknown, it's only in the sense that he hadn't reached the attention that, ironically, ALS and this terrible diagnosis ultimately gave him. He had, for more than a decade before, actually been a very powerful leader on issues ranging from raising the minimum wage. He worked at an immigrants' rights organization called Make the Road. He was is a Yale law graduate, and had run this very powerful campaign to reform the Federal Reserve to make it work for low-income communities and communities of color. Which all of which we condensed to the first 4 minutes of the film, because his whole because we didn't have time, and what happened subsequently to his diagnosis is so amazing. And I think one of the messages of the film, so throughout it tracks as he begins his journey with that encounter on the plane, all the way to becoming the most powerful activist in America, which is what Politico calls him, and these kinds of time and other accolades. And what I think we want to show through that transition, it takes us on this road trip across the country, which we'll talk about later. But I think what we want to show, beyond anything, the message in Adi's life is that if Adi can do it, so can you. If he, in his condition and his physical deterioration, can still go out and affect change, and it doesn't necessarily need to just be activism and organizing. It can be voting. It can be pursuing the other things that you're passionate about. I think his whole kind of life embodies this message. And so we hope that through the journey, as you see Adi become that, despite the condition he's in, Adi is now, for those who've seen the film or aware of his work, is now fully paralyzed. He speaks with his eyes through a technology called eye gaze, which allows his sort of like a keyboard that he uses his pupils to track the keyboard and make the words speak through a text-to-speech robotic voice, sort of like Stephen Hawking. He is still, to this day, working as an activist, pushing the Biden administration to for universal health care, and working on a number of other racial and social justice issues using only his eyes. And so, without kind of getting into the narrative of every part of the film, that progression, I think, is really inspiring, because there's this progression of his disease that goes almost in total parallel to his progression and rise as a major political figure in the US. So that's hopefully somewhat of an answer to your question.
No, it's a great answer. So Amanda, not every documentary film follows a cross-country advocacy road trip that actually also included Ohio. and even a series of interviews with presidential candidates that Adi conducted. Can you talk with us about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we spent a good amount of time in Ohio, and one of the best scenes in the film is based in Ohio, which is where Tracy gives that incredible bird dogging training to a bunch of your constituents in Columbus, and Steve Wagner's there, and it's a really incredible scene. But I think that, you know, Ohio also is a bit of a bellwether state in terms of elections, and Liz and Adi were going on this crazy road trip to basically flip the House for the midterm elections. So I think it was a really important stop for them for that reason. And also, Adi actually started his career technically in Ohio, in Cincinnati, Ohio. He was the comms director for Victoria Wilson, who did not win, but they lost by a very small fraction of a vote. So it's definitely a special place in his heart. And yeah, really was where he first kind of started getting into campaigns and elections. And so when we were in Cincinnati, he actually also stopped and did a little event with her too, and it was a really nice reunion. So Ohio was an important stop for him. And yeah, I mean, he also then went on to interview all of the presidential candidates, which was something that, again, when we started filming this project documentary, we knew he was incredible. We knew he was going to do something big, but like, we did not expect him to have all of the top presidential Democratic candidates willing to come to his home in Santa Barbara in the middle of their election campaigns, which is really crazy. They had no time, but they made time for him because he had become such a major progressive voice, especially in terms of healthcare. So to see that rise and to see his influence grow was really inspiring, and also made me really hopeful about power that individuals have with their stories and being able to really make a change.
Yes, indeed. Nicholas, you and your team had a really intimate relationship with Adi and his family. I would say more intimate than your average portrait documentary. You know, can you talk about that kind of access and how unique that is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a really good question, because for me as an audience member and also as a filmmaker with real people storytelling or documentary, I think that access is the most important element of storytelling. It's much more important than what kind of camera you use or what your editing is. It's really about that relationship. I think another word for access is just trust. And in the case of Adi and Not Going Quietly, I think there was this unusual implicit understanding. I think him and I hit it off at first really well. We're the same age. Both of our families are Jewish American from similar cultural backgrounds. His parents live a couple blocks from where I grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And we just sort of had some commonality in our experience, except of course that this incredibly tragic thing had happened. So I felt right away that this could have been me. You know, he could have been a friend of mine. There's even people that we knew sort of in common together. And I saw myself in him and thought a lot about what would I do if I were in his shoes. Would I be so resilient? Would I still press on with the things I care about? And that's what really kind of attracted me to the story and indebted me to him. But I think what reciprocated that and what made him want to share his story was not how he understood intuitively from that interaction with Jeff Flake that the personal is political. And he recognized that, one thing that I find very interesting about him and that transitional moment in his life where the movie kicks off is that he hadn't told a lot of friends and family about his ALS diagnosis in the year after it had happened. And only intimate people knew, because he didn't want to shout it on Facebook for people to say, oh, that's so terrible, I feel bad for you, Adi. He never felt like it was something that he wanted to be public about. And so when he was all of a sudden on the news, on every channel and all over the internet, as this sick father, people were reaching out to him saying, oh my God, Adi, I didn't know. And that changed in that moment when we met him, because I think he realized then people are now listening to me. I now have this huge voice. Even though I'm losing my physical voice, I now have one that's much stronger. And that's, of course, what the title and what the whole film is about inherently. And so he really was open to this idea. I think we were very transparent with him that we are going to have to film all the kind of brutal elements of ALS. We're going to have to show how it affects your relationship with your son. The film is not just a political journey, as you can see from the clip we saw, and many more behind it. It's actually about the parallel tracks that his political and personal life take, and the toll that his political work takes on his personal life. And so the access and trust came from his understanding, and what the film is really about at its core is that stories have power. And what he ultimately does on this road trip that passes through Ohio and so many other states where he activates people is he brings other people who have healthcare stories, illnesses, or members of their family who need to fight for healthcare to confront politicians here in Ohio and all over the country, and capture them on camera with cell phones talking to their representatives, just like he did with Jeff Flake, and using their stories as tools. And that's kind of like a little microcosm of what documentary films do, what political documentary films do well, is build empathy, connect you to people, and then raise awareness about an issue. And so Adi was doing that on a micro scale with everybody, and empowering other people to use their stories to create social change. And so I think for that reason, he was open to saying, yes, you can come to my doctor's appointments, you can be there when I'm with my son. And it was something we had to negotiate carefully. There were things that we didn't film, and there were times that we stepped back to be sensitive to their privacy and their family. But I think there was a very deep connection between, we knew how audiences would feel and react and act in response to the story, and how much access and trust and intimacy the film had. And I think his willingness to do that paid off in the final product.
It is such a personal journey of somebody living with ALS and the family around him. So Amanda, can you share any kind of update about the family? You know, his wife, Rachel, son, Carl, daughter, Willow?
Yeah, definitely. Now at this point in Adi's life, he has 24/7 care with amazing caregivers, which is incredible because it really helps free up a lot of Rachel's time. Before, she was also a full-time caregiver, mom, and professor, which is just kind of an unsustainable way to keep going. It's just far too much work for any person to take on. And so now their life is pretty good so far. Adi has a trach, and he uses eye gaze technology to communicate, as you'll see in the film, and he could very well live another 10, 20, 30, 40, hopefully 100 years. And he's really enjoying watching his kids grow up. Carl's 4, he's 5. He's almost 5 in May. And then Willow is 1, and she will be 2 in November. And they're doing really well. They're getting along. Their relationship is developing. I was just talking to Rachel about how Carl really loves to be loved. And so having a little sister who adores him is working out very well for him. And so it's really nice to see them together and developing that relationship. And I think that's something that, of course, brings Adi and Rachel a lot of joy. So it's not to say that things aren't still challenging, because of course they are, but I think all things considered, things are pretty good.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask one more question before we open it up to the audience. So feel free, as it's been put in the chat, to type a question in there. I have more questions, of course, but we certainly welcome audience questions. So Nicholas, if I remember correctly, one of the scenes in the film alludes to an arrest of Adi. And, that to me indicates that editing must have been really tough. So can you talk about footage that was left on the cutting room floor and how challenging that process was?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. And maybe Amanda, you can think of more after I go, but it was definitely challenging in the sense that we shot 400 hours of footage, I think, of Adi. And there was a lot of things that narratively were really important. Also were just, poignant or beautiful or funny. I think Adi got arrested maybe a dozen times while we were filming for different causes and at different times. And we actually had quite a bit of footage of that, and it was very I think, dramatic to see, and to see somebody with ALS be hauled away, but it wasn't something we were able to include because it didn't quite fit into our structure of the story. Amanda got arrested once while making the movie. And so there's another story behind that.
And we want to hear about that, but please keep going.
Yeah, I make sure that story gets included at every Q&A. We, I'll say a couple of things. So one is that I mentioned is that we really would have loved to have included more of Adi's backstory, because the work he did was so important prior, and that was something we had to really gloss over. But the other thing that I think is really important about the film, and we didn't get to talk about as much, is the other characters in the story. Adi, of course, is the protagonist, and he's the one who leads this fight. But everybody in the story, which you guys will get to see, or some have seen already, there's really a motley crew of activists and sort of activist storytellers that come around Adi, who each have their own personal stories that they share. So one large thread of the film is the fight against Brett Kavanaugh, the Supreme Court justice, and how the fight for healthcare becomes about that fight. And that scene is led by Ana Maria Archila, who's another activist that is in Adi's network and was part of the Be a Hero campaign and the Be a Hero tour. And she has an incredibly powerful story, which relates. Similarly, Tracy Corder, who leads the bird dogging here in Ohio, is a racial justice activist who has her own amazing story that connects to the work that Adi's doing. Liz, who's the other sort of partner in crime for Adi, has a long history of fighting for social causes, and her family comes from a family of anti-apartheid activists in South Africa. And at one time, the film had her whole backstory and how she came to be in that moment with Adi, filming that interaction with Jeff Flake, and how that arrived. And that, of course, didn't make the cut. The conversations with the presidential candidates were fascinating, and the whole behind the scenes of how they came together. It really wasn't just that he interviewed them and said, okay, he kind of, and his team worked behind the scenes to say why they had to come see him, why they had to come to Santa Barbara, and why his voice was so important, and how that came together which was months of political machinery and operation, is all reduced to 2 minutes in the film. And, we really wanted to show in the film how that activism works behind the scenes, not just how ALS works, not just Adi's story, but how a movement can be built from scratch, which is what you see and what we want people to take away from the film. But so much of that had to be sliced and diced to 30 seconds or less, even in a feature film. So we'll have to think about a sequel.
Amanda, how did you get arrested? Tell us that, and also just feel free to kind of expound on what Nicholas talked about overall.
Yeah, sure. I got arrested for testing Brett Kavanaugh, and feel very good about that. What a dumpy person. And I got arrested because Adi was actually leading a civil disobedience action against him at the Capitol building. And so I went in and I figured that I could try to get as much footage on my iPhone as possible, because the police officers were very, very adamant that people not film. So I did my best, and we got a couple of shots there. And Adi was, wheeled into this big conference room where they were holding all of us. And coincidentally, it ended up being the same hearing room that Kavanaugh was in later on. And so, that's the story of my arrest. It was great. It was definitely something I would never take back, and was honored to be arrested with Adi and Tracy Corder, who's in the film, and Helen Brosnan were also arrested as well, and Nate Smith, Adi's best friend. So it was pretty fun. wasn't the most challenging arrest ever. And then in terms of what was left on the cutting room floor, that scene, we didn't get the full arrest in there, which was a tough call. And there's so many moments. There were a lot of really funny, humorous moments too that just didn't make it in, which I think caused us all a lot of pain. There's one scene where at the very beginning of the tour, they had this massive gray water spill in their RV. And then for people who aren't experienced with RVs, which I wasn't before this, gray water is all like the dirty sink water. Black water is all of the toilet water. But it's still pretty disgusting, and their RV flooded entirely with gray water like within 2 days of the trip. And Nate, Audie's best friend and driver and caregiver, was pretty upset, and Audie was pretty amused by the whole situation. But there were many moments like that hit the cutting room floor. But yeah, as Nick said, we have to find another outlet for that. And Audie also, there's so many amazing interview bites that we had from him, and I feel like we want to find a way to share that with other people too, because a lot of these moving speeches hit the cutting room floor, things that brought us to tears, that other people I'm sure would love to hear as well. So something else that we're trying to figure out, whether in, unreleased clips or some version of an audio recording, we want to get that out.
Okay, Nick, are we gonna open it up?
Certainly, yeah. We've had a number of questions come in. So to start with, one of the reasons that the Leadership Center really liked this film and wanted to partner on this film was that it really showcases the story that any individual has both the power to take action and then make a difference, right? And Audie is a really great case in showcasing that spirit. So I'm curious that as the film has debuted, as people have seen it, and the reactions that have come in, have you all seen that this film has encouraged and inspired others to take that action?
A really great question. I think we just released it, so our hope is that this is just the beginning, and over the course of the next year, where this film is hopefully released more widely, we'll be able to have lots of more interactions with people in person to hear how the film has changed their view about activism politics and the ways that they can get engaged, and what their hopes and goals are and the way that they've been inspired to act after seeing the film. And I think the only thing that I could probably speak to right now is that while we were filming, people were coming up to Audie and Liz kind of in droves, saying that his story and his work has moved them to do more in their lives and made them realize that if he can do it, they can do it too, and that there's no act too big or too small to get engaged and participate in our democracy. So I think we're both really excited to see the ways in which that really takes off as the film becomes more widely accessible. And I would love to hear from people in Ohio too, if they feel like they've been moved to act at all. That would be really cool.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is just I would kind of be looking forward more, because again, we've this Cleveland Film Festival is just kind of our second or third screening. We are planning a wide release, which we can talk more about later, or at least drop the how to get that info. But we do have a lot of things kind of in the pipeline. So one, it's really gratifying to be able to show the film to folks, to this community in Ohio and elsewhere. Obviously, we're Audie's in Los Angeles, in Santa Barbara, California, and I'm in New York City, and we really want this film to reach audiences outside of urban, liberal, and progressive areas. And we really, and Audie's work does that. That's why Audie wanted to take this tour on the road to reach communities that aren't always touched by this type of storytelling and activism. And so this is really important to us. And so what we're doing, in conjunction with what will be kind of a traditional commercial release where the film will be on TV and with a streamer, is do a lot of this kind of work where we bring it to places like the Leadership Center, also to schools and universities. This afternoon, we're doing a screening at Stony Brook University, I believe, with students. We are working with our broadcast partner, and we're actually going to develop a curriculum that will be for students alongside the film. And we're really excited about this, because we're going to work with a few educators who are, we're filmmakers and don't know the pedagogy per se, but we're going to work with some actual educators and activists to create lesson plan, discussion guide, what you can do in your community, kits for actual high school and college audiences. And what I think is really exciting about the film is that Audie, of course, is fighting for this one core issue, which is to make healthcare more accessible, to create universal healthcare. But the film touches on many other bullets in the sort of overall progressive agenda. We mentioned the Supreme Court fight. Adi worked on immigrant rights issues and other things in the past. And so we really want the film, of course, to encourage people to learn more and be more educated about the healthcare system and how it's failed people like Adi, and worse for those who are less privileged than Adi and suffer from issues like ALS. But we also want it to just educate folks on how to become engaged and active participants in democracy, whether that's actually going and confronting your representative. It doesn't have to be aggressive. It could just be showing up to a town hall, writing a letter, emailing, doing the kind of basic civic duty, all the way to what Adi's doing, which is actually organizing and getting people active to vote, and the other sort of touchstones in democracy building that the film touches on. So I hope that the film, as we go through this campaign, will partner with a lot of organizations, such as your guys. Additionally, we're working with organizations like Make the Road, which is an national immigrants' rights organization, Local Progress, both of these where Adi worked, which is a network of local politicians working on the issues in this film who are progressive, the Center for Popular Democracy. We're looking for institutional and educational partners to screen this so that it's not just kind of people, sitting back on Friday night and, watching on Amazon, but actually in settings where there will be discussions afterwards about translating the issues into real action, which we're not the experts on, but real leaders in those communities are. And so we really want this to be a tool for activists and for educators to use. So that's kind of in the plan, and I hope that we do see more of that. And of course, we just want people to be entertained and moved by the film. I think it's important to say that as well. This is a tool for activism, and it's a story of activists. But I also just hope that it's something that does, in the ways, I see a question here about changing your approach and future work and stuff. And I think one of the main things in the film, I think, is also just about like empathy and community for people who are dealing with disability, suffering from illness. And for me personally, working with Adi, it's really transformed the way I interact with other folks, or I think it's heading me in that path, and I can talk more about that. But I hope that people just find the film itself to be a moving experience and transformative personally, not just a call to action. Sorry, that was a long answer.
That's all right. Thank you.
It's a great answer.
So some of the folks on the call today have seen the film. Others are excited to see the film through the film festival. Nicholas and Amanda, is there a moment in the film, a highlight that you want to make sure that folks see as they watch this film?
What a great question. I'm trying to think of I don't know if there's one moment.
You've got 400 hours of film probably running through your head right now.
I know. I'm seeing my life flash before my eyes. I think one of the most powerful moments in the film really happens at the very end. And I don't want to speak too much about that for the people who haven't seen the film, because I don't want to give that away. So I think all I could say on that is watch the whole film, watch the ending, and I hope you love it. But I do think that like that bird dogging training scene led by Tracy Corder is another one that's really important, because I think it's a good example of how organizing and being in community with people who share your vision for a better society is not only energizing and meaningful work, but it's also can be fun, and you can have fun with it. And these people are charismatic and engaging and smart and witty. And I think seeing that is a reminder of the fact that like you can do this work and have a really great time doing it. It doesn't have to be that, you're really killing yourself. You can enjoy the process too. And I think that's something that isn't spoken about a lot, but is something that Audie, Tracy, Liz, Helen, Anna Maria, his best friend Nate all really encapsulate. They have a really good, fun, and joyous time with it, and they deal with a lot of heavy issues with a lot of levity and humor. So I think that scene is important.
I agree. See it, watch it to the end. I think what I was trying to get at, the end is really about choosing hope over despair. And that's what Adi does and what the movie is about. ALS is an incredibly devastating and brutal illness. And so it's about overcoming a tragedy like that and finding meaning in life. And Adi finds meaning through activism and through collective action. And we want people to inspire people around that. But the takeaway, I think, from the end of the film is how to find meaning in the worst and how to make that choice for hope. It's been obviously a difficult many years. The film kind of tracks the Trump administration and the challenges that has brought to many people. And then, of course, even in subsequent year about what we've been going through for the last year with the COVID pandemic, which is only really touched upon in the epilogue of the film. That's a big danger to Adi personally, but I'm happy to say that he was recently vaccinated, which was good. And I think is a little bit, he's incredibly vulnerable, having a respiratory, being on ventilation. And where I'm going with this is just to say that I think there's a parallel between what happens at the end of the film and how Adi transcends this disease to how we collectively transcend this very difficult global moment and global health crisis that we've been going through, and how we come out stronger for it.
So we've had a number of questions come in to talk about what's next. Is there a Not Going Quietly 2 in the works? How do we take this film and continue documenting as the film may be over, but his story is continuing? Are there things happening, or how are we making sure that people continue to learn about his story and go in concert with him?
Yeah, I think one thing that everyone can do if you're really moved by Adi's story and want to keep up with him, he has a very active Twitter. He's Twitter famous, and he also runs the Be a Hero Fund with Liz Jaff, and you can go to the beaherofund.com and sign up for their newsletters if you want to stay up to date on the latest with them. We also at People's Television release regular content with the Be a Hero team. We just released a video about Adi's caregivers, Izzy, Barrios, and Mario Diaz, and that film also features Adi and Rachel. So you can kind of keep up to date with them through all those social media accounts and the Be a Hero Fund.
Fantastic. So the last question, and I think that has come in a couple of times, is, that you talked about this idea of hope at the end of the film, and that really is sort of what it leaves you with. What about this project for you gives you hope as you look forward in 2021 and 2022 and so forth?
Well, I think Adi's story in general, I think I feel very hopeful about the country. The film is about kind of the elections, and then winning elections, as a movement. And then once elected, the film tracks both the 2018 and then beginnings of the 2020 election. And the film is about winning those elections, organizing, but then of course holding elected officials to account, which is what the whole tour is about, and what he does with Jeff Flake, and what he's continuing to do today with Joe Biden. It's a bipartisan thing, and Adi's continuing to do that work. He's right now, in addition to some of the positive changes happening at the national level, on a state-by-state level, there's been a very strong and kind of once in a generation push to have a single payer healthcare system, which is something that Adi and I, as I'm here as a filmmaker, but also believe in very passionately. And in California, there's a universal single payer piece of legislation that's going through the works called CalCare, and Adi's advocating for that right now. We're actually working on a series of him interviewing, much like he did with the presidential candidates, local politicians. And so a lot of these fights happen at the local level, not just at the national, which is what the film tracks. And so I think that we have emerged in a time. I'm also very hopeful about how engaged the young people in the film and the young people who are seeing our film are right now in politics. I sort of came of age in the early Bush eras and sort of protesting the Iraq and Afghanistan wars and seeing folks. And I remembered that it was kind of a struggle to get people when I was a college student really engaged and to care about what was happening abroad and what was happening politically. And I find now that I'm, in my late 30s, when I interact and show this film and others to young people, that they all just want to be part of the democratic process and all want to be engaged around the issues. And maybe that's a small sampling, but I feel very hopeful when I see that. And I also think the last thing that gives me hope that's really important here is how, despite all the challenges that we have with social media, that and big tech, et cetera, that we do have these incredible tools for storytelling and activism now. A lot of this film, as Amanda mentioned earlier, was actually shot on iPhones. It was shot by activists. It was shot by us in sensitive situations. And I think the phone itself is this incredible tool for storytelling. And then social media, while it has many, many downsides, can be used, as in Adi's case with his Twitter, to build a huge platform and to build a whole movement around. And none of these things existed 5 or 10 years ago. And of course, they've been corrupted and used in terrible ways. But I feel very hopeful both about the future of storytelling and about the future of kind of activism if these tools are placed into the right hands, because they're going to change the world. They just need to be used by the right people in the right ways. So that's what's on my mind for the coming years.
So, well, Nicholas, Amanda, Patrick, thank you so much for being willing to share with us today. We are so excited to partner with the film festival on this film. We threw a link in the chat. If you haven't had a chance yet, go onto the film festival website, get tickets. You can see this film. You can use the discount code CLC and get $1 off of your ticket admission. So we'll put all of that information into your follow-up email. If you want to learn more about the film, we'll send a link there, as well as connect you to the ALS Association Northern Ohio chapter if you want to learn more about ALS as well. But to the three of you, thank you so much for giving your time today.